Can we do this now?
Yeah, we can. I figured this was, because it's Comic-Con, this would be the place to do this, but I have,
I've seen things that still haunt me. That's what Elijah Wood said in an interview, his voice low, distant, almost afraid. What he went on to reveal would forever change how the world sees Hollywood. For decades, audiences adored child stars. They smiled on red carpets, lit up the screen with innocence and charm, and became household names before they could even spell them. But behind the sparkle, behind the lights, something else was happening, something dark. Elijah didn't name names, but he didn't have to. He spoke of secret parties where predators lurked, of powerful men who operated above the law, of a system designed not to protect the children, but to silence them. And he wasn't alone. Corey Feldman, Macaulay Culkin, even River Phoenix, each name carries its own trauma, its own scars. Elijah confirmed what many had only whispered about in online forums and backstage gossip, that there is, and has always been, a shadow network within Hollywood, preying on the most vulnerable. These weren't isolated incidents, they were patterns. And Elijah, a child actor himself who miraculously made it out intact, is one of the few brave enough to speak out. The industry wanted to keep it buried, but his words cracked open the silence. The truth is, a lot of people knew, and they let it happen. This isn't just another expose, this is a reckoning. Because what really happened to child stars in Hollywood is much darker than anyone imagined. Elijah Jordan Wood was born on the 28th of January, 1981 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a place far from the glare of Hollywood lights. He was the second of 3 children in a working-class family. His parents, Deborah and Warren Wood, owned a delicatessen and lived modestly, grounded in Midwestern values. But even from an early age, Elijah was different. By the time he was 4, Elijah was already mimicking characters from television. He had a precocious charm, big, expressive eyes, and a quiet intensity that drew people in. His mother noticed this spark and, in what would become a life-altering decision, moved the family to Los Angeles when Elijah was just 7 years old. She believed he had something special, and she was right. But LA wasn't a dreamland. It was a city filled with illusions, predators, and pressure. While other kids were learning multiplication tables, Elijah was standing in front of casting directors, trying to convince strangers that he was the one. He began working in commercials and small roles almost immediately, his talent undeniable. But behind every audition was the same reality. He was a child surrounded by adults, all with agendas. He didn't go to a regular school. His friends were mostly other actors, kids who knew how to cry on cue, but were silently battling stress, burnout, and fear. Elijah later spoke about how surreal it was to grow up like that, to have to be professional while still losing baby teeth. One director recalled, he could do things at age 9 that grown men couldn't, but he also looked exhausted all the time. There were whispers, older boys on set who acted strange, adults who got too close, parties where there were no parents. Elijah never spoke of being directly harmed, but his voice has always hinted at something he saw, or knew, or couldn't forget. While most kids were building Lego castles, Elijah Wood was navigating the unspoken rules of an industry that fed on youth and demanded silence in return. Elijah Wood didn't rise to fame. He sprinted. By age 8, he had already appeared in a Paula Abdul music video, and by 9, he landed a pivotal role in Avalon, a critically acclaimed Barry Levinson film that showcased his uncanny emotional depth. Hollywood noticed, and it didn't take long before studios were lining up to cast him. Throughout the early 1992nd, Elijah became a fixture on the big screen. Forever Young, 1992, with Mel Gibson. The Good Son, 1993, opposite Macaulay Culkin. North, 1994. Flipper, 1996. Each role cemented his status as Hollywood's go-to child actor. But unlike many others, Elijah had range. He could be tender, intense, even frightening, often portraying kids carrying burdens far beyond their age. He was working non-stop, press tours, red carpets, photo shoots. For a child, it should have been overwhelming. But Elijah never broke down, at least not in front of cameras. He smiled. He delivered, and he kept moving. But behind the accolades and fan mail, there was isolation. He was surrounded by adults, praised for being mature for his age, but rarely treated like a child. He later admitted that he had no real childhood, no school dances, no teenage rebellion, no normal friendships. Every day was work, every conversation calculated, and every mistake scrutinized. Then, at the turn of the millennium, everything changed. Peter Jackson was casting for The Lord of the Rings. Thousands auditioned, but Elijah sent in a homemade audition tape fully in costume, reciting lines with the intensity of someone twice his age. Jackson was stunned. The role of Frodo Baggins would launch him into global stardom. It wasn't just a blockbuster, it was a phenomenon. 3 films, 6 years of his life, and Elijah was suddenly the face of a cinematic legend. He was celebrated, worshipped, immortalized in pop culture. But with that global fame came a heavier shadow. The boy who had been exposed to the underbelly of Hollywood now had more power, but also more to lose. One journalist wrote, "He went from child star to chosen one, but even Frodo couldn't carry that kind of ring without consequences. He had survived Hollywood. At least, that's what the world believed." Elijah Wood had transitioned from child prodigy to respected adult actor without public meltdowns or rehab headlines. But survival doesn't mean escape, and silence doesn't mean peace. In 2016, during a quiet interview with the Sunday Times, Elijah dropped a bombshell. "You all grew up watching them on screen, but you have no idea what was happening behind the scenes." He wasn't talking about acting, he was talking about abuse. Without naming names, Elijah spoke of a pedophilia ring operating in the shadows of Hollywood, protected by money, silence, and fear. He described a systemic failure where powerful predators used charm and influence to lure child actors into private parties, manipulate them, then silence them. Some of these children became stars. Some vanished. And some were never the same. Elijah himself said he was lucky. His mother was fiercely protective and kept him away from most industry events. But not all kids had that shield. He knew others. He heard the stories. And once he grew old enough to recognize the signs, it was too late to forget. There are a lot of vipers in this industry, people who only have their own interests in mind. What bothers me is that there are still people working who've done terrible things. His words sent shockwaves through the entertainment world, but Hollywood's response? Almost nothing. There was no formal investigation, no floodgates opening, no powerful figures exposed, because the predators Elijah hinted at were not nameless monsters. They were insiders, directors, agents, producers, people still working, still smiling, still shaking hands on red carpets. One former child actor, who asked to remain anonymous, confirmed Elijah's warnings. Everyone knew, but no one stopped it, because stopping it meant burning bridges and losing everything. Elijah's statements were brave, but also dangerous. Since then, he's kept a low profile, choosing roles outside the mainstream, avoiding industry parties, and focusing on projects that don't require his silence. He didn't break down, he broke free, but the trauma, the collective silence, still haunts him. And even today, he remains one of the very few child stars willing to say what others still fear. It happened, it's happening, and no one's doing enough to stop it. Elijah Wood spoke out, but he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for Corey Haim, whose career soared in the 82nd before spiraling into addiction and death at 38. For River Phoenix, who collapsed on a sidewalk outside the Viper Room in 1993 at just 23 years old, his body full of drugs, his soul long gone before. For Judy Garland, Dana Plato, Brad Renfro, Jonathan Brandis, names etched into Hollywood history and tragedies buried beneath it. Elijah was one of the lucky ones, but he never called himself a survivor, because to survive means leaving something behind, and Elijah never could. "I still think about them," he once said, "all the ones who didn't make it." He wasn't exaggerating, the statistics are chilling. A disproportionate number of former child actors end up in therapy, addicted, incarcerated, or dead. Why? Because they were never taught to be children. They were trained to perform happiness while masking trauma, groomed to obey, to entertain, to stay quiet. And when they broke down, Hollywood looked away. The real tragedy is not just the abuse. It's the cover-up, the machinery that protects the abusers and discards the victims, the fake smiles, the untouchable careers. The children left behind, often blamed for their own collapse. One former co-star of Elijah once said, "We were all in the same room, but only he got out clean. The rest of us are still bleeding." This is the moment Elijah's story ceases to be about one man and becomes about an entire generation. A generation groomed for the camera and abandoned when the lights dimmed. Elijah never named names, but he didn't have to. The silence was the name. Elijah Wood is still here. While many of his peers were consumed by the very system that made them famous, he chose a different path, quiet, deliberate, purposeful. He turned away from blockbusters and walked toward independent films, producing projects he believed in, using his influence without ever selling his soul. But the shadows never left him. Even when he's not talking about it, it's in his eyes, in the way he chooses his roles, in the causes he quietly supports, in his refusal to join the Hollywood party circuit that devoured so many others. He doesn't need to name names. His distance from the system says more than any headline ever could. And still, the system remains. Few listened when he spoke. Fewer still acted. The truth Elijah revealed was too uncomfortable, too dangerous, too deeply embedded in the DNA of an industry built on image. And so, for now, it remains a whisper, a crack in the facade. But Elijah's legacy isn't just what he said, it's what he survived. It's the fact that he dared to speak, knowing full well that Hollywood doesn't forgive those who shatter illusions. Maybe we'll never know the full truth. Maybe those stories will remain locked behind velvet curtains and studio contracts. But one thing is certain. Elijah Wood was never just Frodo. He was the boy who made it out alive. And he never forgot the ones who didn't.